on target.
Almost there.
Stay on target.
They're right behind me.
Almost there.
What?
Hello and welcome to another edition of Yakima On Target. I'm your host, Sean Davidow, and we're back in the studio at the White Pack Studios on 2nd Street, which means we have a guest with us, Mr. Don Meseck. He's a regional labor economist for the Employment Security Department. Thank you for joining me today, Don.
Well, thank you for asking.
Now, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. The first thing I want to do is the word economist and what economists do. We hear that a lot. Can you tell us what you do for the Employment Security Department, what numbers you look at specifically?
Sure. We look at primarily the labor market. And I'm a regional economist. I serve 7 counties here: Adams, Chelan, Douglas, Grant, Kititas, Okanagan, and Yakima. So we can't tell people where to invest. We don't work with investments or other aspects of the economy. But in terms of the labor market, that's what we do. We quantify and analyze labor market conditions. Specifically, we look a lot at quarterly census employment and wage data, which based on quarterly tax reports employers submit to us, and that's very detailed, very good employment and wage data by major industry, such as construction, finance, insurance, real estate, the 3 levels of government, wholesale trade, retail trade. We look at current employment statistics data, which is an estimate of employment currently. Most currently, it's December 2021. And we look at LAUS, local area unemployment statistics, which are primarily based on the labor force data. And specifically, we get to look at we calculate the unemployment rates at the county levels. So the 3 sources are quarterly census employment and wage data, current employment statistics data, and local area unemployment statistics data.
Now, one of the things I want to talk about, I'm not an economist, so I do want to talk about those numbers and what we're talking about just a little bit. When you say employment statistics, we're talking about people with jobs, right?
Yes.
And when we talk about unemployment numbers and statistics, we're talking about the workforce and a population base. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and that's an excellent question, Sean. In a nutshell, the labor force data, the local area unemployment statistics data, are based on place of residence. The current employment statistics data are based on place of work. We're counting jobs in Yakima County.
People that have jobs right now in
Right.
Yakima County.
So depending on commuting, there are 2 different data sets, but they both help us to give us a different view of the local economy. And again, that's an excellent question. So in a nutshell, current employment statistics data are based on place of work.
Right. People in jobs.
People in jobs in Yakima County, regardless if they commute in from Tri-Cities or from Kititas County. The local area unemployment statistics are based on civilian labor force data, and that's place of residence. So a person could work here in Yakima, but actually be commuting, teleworking, to a job in King County. They could be commuting to a job at Hanford, Tri-Cities.
Now let's talk a little bit about, so those numbers are interesting to look at. Talk about those numbers and how they play a part in Yakima County. You were talking about commuters and people like that. Where are some of the jobs at that we're talking about in those numbers?
Well, that's another good question. I think that we still have a sizable amount of commuting out of Yakima County, especially to Tri-Cities, and to a lesser degree, I think, to Kititas County, especially Central Washington University. But one of the trends I've been seeing lately in our labor force data is the rather strong employment growth in the labor force. And I think what we're seeing is a fair number of Yakima residents either teleworking or commuting to jobs out of Yakima County.
And somewhat the telework thing is definitely an effect of COVID-19 and the pandemic.
Yes, that I think has affected a lot of counties in Central Washington, especially Chelan County, especially Kititas, and probably to a lesser degree Yakima. But a fair number of residents live here, but they may be working, if they're teleworking, virtually anywhere in the United States or in the world for that matter.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about, so we want to step back. We want to look at some older data, the 10-year trends in employment and wage trends in Yakima County. Now, about a decade ago, we were in a recession. That was about the time of the recession. Since then, just from my observations, we've broken some records with low numbers, right? So talk
Yes.
about that and talk about the 10-year trends for us.
Yeah, I think one of the best places to start is with our total covered employment.
Okay.
So I don't know if we have that slide up there for
Right.
slide 3,
Okay.
but what we can see is that from 2010 to 2020, that total covered employment rose 10.9% in Yakima County. From 2019 to 2020, employment actually fell by minus 4.4%. But on an annualized growth rate, our annualized employment growth in Yakima County was 1% per year. The state's growth rate was 1.5% per year. So on the whole, our economy has been growing, but we haven't been growing quite as rapidly as the state. We've still netted job growth over that 10-year period. But of course, 2020 was a dismal year for the local economy. We had a minus 4.4% job loss rate.
Due to the pandemic. Now talk a little bit
Yes.
about, just talk about that. How we were affected. How was the Yakima County labor market affected by the pandemic?
Yes, it was really hammered by
Right.
the pandemic. And you know, for this, I think if there's a slide I can bring up, I think it would be very revealing on
Definitely.
the number of jobs we watched. We saw that were lost in the county. It was slide 12.
Okay.
And in this one, slide 12, we can see that 2020 was a brutal year for
Right.
the local economy and for the Washington State job markets. But specifically in non-farm employment in 2020, Yakima County dropped 4.9%. Just looking at non-farm jobs in the county. The state dropped at a 5.3% clip. So in effect, although we had a bad year, we didn't lose jobs quite as rapidly as the state. Last year, 2021, was a recovery. Not a total recovery, but we definitely moved in the right direction. Our growth rate was 2.5, almost 2.6% when the state grew at a 2.5% clip. So the takeaway is that calendar year 2020 was a dismal year for the local economy. It was a dismal year for the state. In fact, both areas, when I compared our job loss rate in 2020 to the Great Recession, remember the Great Recession hit us in 2009.
Right.
Yakima County lost 1.7% of its non-farm jobs. Well, in 2020, during COVID, it was minus 4.9. Washington State lost 5.3% of its non-farm jobs in 2020 and minus 4.4%, a little less of a job loss rate in 2009. So it's the takeaway is that in terms of non-farm job loss rates, both the county and the state lost more jobs during that brief but bitter COVID-19 related recession in 2020.
Right. Then we had
Then we lost in
2009.
2009, yeah.
So, but those jobs are recovering to a degree. We were talking yesterday a little bit. You said there's good news and bad news.
Yes.
Talk about the good news and the bad news. Just a
Okay.
little bit.
I think the good news is that we are adding a fair number of jobs. When I looked at, in aggregate, how we've done, we see that the Yakima County labor market actually recovered modestly in 2021.
What slide are we looking at there?
This is actually slide 14.
14.
When we look at slide 14, we can see that how many jobs did we add last year? 2,100 jobs on an annual average basis in calendar year 2021. And specifically, we rose from 82,900 up to 85,000, a 2,100 job gain, 2.5%. And so that's definitely good news. Industries that really rebounded last year were construction,
Right.
Retail trade, health services, leisure and hospitality, and even local government. So I think one of the industries that added a lot of jobs last year, of course, was leisure and hospitality. And think hotels, eating and drinking places.
Reopening, right?
Reopened.
Okay.
Also the amusement and recreation area also
Right.
rebounded last year with whether it's fitness centers, golf courses, bowling alleys, movie theaters. Some of them were opening up
Right.
in 2021 and they were closed for most of 2020. So local government, if you think of especially local public schools, we saw a lot of layoffs in 2020, especially in the non-teaching staff, whether it's bus drivers, cafeteria workers, and many were rehired last year.
Right.
Now, that was the good news.
Yes.
And the
Now give us
downside,
the bad data.
the one thing, it's not quite time to break out the champagne yet,
Yeah.
Sean, but when we looked at and I'll give you here just some raw data in terms of non-farm employment. In 2019, the county had 87,100 non-farm jobs. It dropped all the way down to 82,900 in 2020, and it bounced back up to 85,000 in 2021. So what's the takeaway? Again, 2020 was a dismal year. 2021 was a recovery year, but we still have not recovered, as of 2021, all the jobs that we had in 2019.
Now let's talk a little bit about that, just that trend. We've still been dealing with some COVID-19
Yes.
issues. I mean, there was a
Yes.
pullback just recently. Do you see those numbers continuing to improve? Is that maybe a bright light at the end of the tunnel? Or
Well-
Yakima tends to be one of those steadily growing economies. We're agriculturally based. Is that the trend that we look at?
Well, I think there's a couple good trends looking at how well we fared. And here, if I take a month-by-month basis,
Right.
I think there's two slides I could ask if they could be
Absolutely.
shown. And I think we'll demonstrate that we ended 2021 much stronger than we started.
Okay.
And the first one I would like to show is slide 18.
Okay.
And here we're looking at the labor force in Yakima County. And slide 18, you can see that the labor force expanded in each of the past 7 months. And when I say past 7 months, our data is only current as of December. So from June all the way up to December, so June, July, August, September, October, November, December, for the last 7 months, and it's inclusive, June through
Right.
December, the labor force in Yakima County has expanded. And I think, remember during COVID-19, the labor force shrank,
Right.
and we're starting to rebound again. Especially, I think, during COVID, we saw retirees cashing in the tips,
Right.
retiring.
Yeah.
And that was one group that seemed to be impacted severely.
Yes.
People deciding it was time to retire. Another group of people, I think, that tended to
Leave the
leave the
workforce.
labor
Yeah.
force during 2020 would be probably two-parent households. One decided to stay home, so
Right.
childcare issues
Yeah.
primarily. A lot of daycares were closed. Someone really had to stay home.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure there's other groups. There also were some discouraged workers. People just decided it was time to leave the labor force for whatever reason. And, but I think the major group that left, the groups were retirees
Right.
and people leaving for childcare reasons.
And that's not
So-
just Yakima. I mean,
That's
that's
not
a
just
national
Yakima,
trend.
that's a
I'm
national
guessing that's
trend.
all over the country. It's just part of the baby boomer. We were talking about this, the baby boomer era, and those people are ready to retire, and now's the time.
That's true. And this is probably even a little more dramatic in slide 20, because what you can see is, in a nutshell, we lost jobs in the first quarter of calendar year 2021.
Right.
We gained jobs year over year in the next 3 quarters, second, third, and fourth quarters. And that's a trend, not just in Yakima County, but statewide. And you can see here by looking at that slide that our total non-farm employment in Yakima County and Washington has risen year over year in each of the past 9 months, in this case going back through April. So those two together, with our labor force growing for the past 7 months and our non-farm, our jobs in Yakima County also expanding, we're definitely ending 2021 on a strong note. Now, what does that mean for 2022? I mean, I expect that trend to continue.
Right.
So labor force is still a little weak, but it's growing. Non-farm employment is starting to recover. Are we back to where we were pre-recession? Not quite, but are we getting there? So more good than bad economic news for Yakima County down the pike, I think, in 2022.
And we're part of the city of Yakima, and we were talking about this earlier. Yakima is the largest population center in the county, so jobs tend to trend and show those numbers also in the city. So if there's a lot of construction going on in Yakima, and we see that,
Yes.
it adds to those numbers.
In fact, you mentioned construction, and I think that's a key industry. You know,
Right.
when I went back and looked at our data in the last 10 years, I found that there are a couple industries that really added a lot of jobs, and I think health services was a large growth area. Agriculture was a growth area. Although the last few years, agriculture has started to stabilize, maybe 3 or 4 years. But I'd like to highlight 2 growth industries. On a percentage basis, with nearly 1,000 jobs gained between 2010 and 2020, was construction.
Right.
By far, construction grew, I think it was roughly 37% in the last 10 years. And yes, we've kind of hit a wall, I think, maybe in, we've not a wall, but kind of plateau
Right.
in terms of 2018, 19, 20, we kind of stabilized, but we really had quite a few years of solid growth.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, when I looked at our growth from last year, again, our estimates, these are estimates
Yes.
for 2021, we're seeing construction with a little pickup again.
Yeah.
So that's one industry. Construction has definitely been a growth industry, nearly 1,000 new jobs in the last 10 years, and with the highest growth rate on a percentage basis in the last 10 years. It's just been phenomenal. Another industry is agriculture. In some aspects has not been growing. If you look at crop production, it's been relatively stable.
Yeah.
But if you look at one subsector, which we affectionately call NAICS 115, which is the agriculture and forestry support, that industry has been on a growth trend every year from 2010 up through 2020. And it's almost been COVID-19 proof.
Right.
And one of the types of businesses in there is crop production services, specifically marijuana crop production services.
Right.
That's been a growth area, as well as some of the high-tech ends of agriculture,
Yeah, that's what I was
crop
gonna say.
management services, and so on. Also farm labor contractors categorized in there. Not the laborers, the H-2A laborers, but the cadre, the state, the supervisors, the people that manage transportation, housing, and so on. So this ag, and we call it ag, forestry, fishing, it's primarily dominated by agriculture. The high-tech end of ag has been a growth area.
Definitely.
It does include marijuana production, farm labor, and everything from irrigation support, crop management. That's
Automation.
Been automation.
I'm a drone pilot, so
Yes,
so
there you go.
That's another growth
There you go.
industry. I mean,
There you go. So it's been, there's been some encouraging news in those industries. So I think that's, hopefully that will be interesting or perhaps even useful to some of our viewers.
it's a bit of a change to our economy in Yakima, just a little bit. Yakima will always be, our county will always be agriculturally based, at least in my mind. I mean,
Yes.
I've grown up here my whole life, and ag is the big
Yes.
driver here, and so.
It
as-
is a pillar of our economy too.
Yes.
And in fact, come to think of it, I had a few other slides put together.
Right?
But one
Not
which,
too many.
not too many.
We've got a few more minutes.
But,
we can
but if I
definitely
could
go through
put
them.
maybe 2 slides up.
Go ahead.
I think
What would you like to-
and these are the pie charts.
Yeah.
And this is specifically slide 9 and slide 10. If we could show slide 9.
Okay, and what are we looking at when we look
What
at
we're
slide
looking
9?
at here is the top 5 industries in Yakima County as of 2020.
Okay.
Now, we do not yet have these detailed QCEW data for 2021.
Right.
The data which will be portrayed here in slide 9 is from our quarterly census, employment and wage. We just obtained these revised data in September of this year
Okay.
for calendar year 2020.
Okay.
So I'm anxious to get 2021 data, but I think what it will show us is that agriculture, forestry, and fishing accounted for 27.8% of all jobs countywide.
Right.
And that equates to 30,767 jobs in countywide in calendar year 2020 out of 110,800 covered jobs. Health services was number 2, local government was number 3, and remember local government also includes tribal employment.
Right.
It also includes schools as well as police, fire, libraries, and the county building, public roads crews, et cetera.
The building we're in.
The building we're in, right. So it's, yeah, so it's that slide, I think slide 9, top 5 industries, what it shows is we have 22 different sectors or subsectors in terms of our North American industry classification coding system. Mm-hmm. Everything from construction, wholesale trade, retail trade, finance, insurance, real estate, the 3 levels of government, federal, state, local, transportation, information, and so on. But out of these 22 categories, or industries, if you will, sometimes we use that term synonymously, sector or industry, 5 accounted for about 70% of all jobs in the county. And I think that when we get this slide up, that top 5 industries, you can see out of 22 employment categories, what are the top employers? Agriculture, number 1, health services, number 2, local government, number 3, retail trade, number 4, and manufacturing, number 5. That's a little over 70% of all jobs countywide. However, now you start looking at, and if we could get this next slide up, which is slide 10, we can see the same pie chart, except this is based on top 5 industries by wages. Okay. We still see ag is the first in terms of wages or payroll pumped into the local economy. 22.5% of Yakima County's payroll was in agriculture. What was the total payroll? It was almost $4.9 billion in calendar year 2020. And specifically, $1.1 billion was in agriculture. And these are jobs on the farm or in the orchard. Next, health services. Health services accounted for 16% of the payroll countywide. And that's roughly $785 million in wages. And local government was ranked number 3 in terms of payroll. So what are the top 5? Agriculture, health services, local government, manufacturing, and retail trade. And again, those 5 industries accounted for about 70% of total payroll dollars earned in Yakima County in calendar year 2020. So I think that gives us some hard data on the number of jobs. It also gives us, when we look at the wages, it gives us hard data on the payroll those industries pump into the Yakima County economy.
I don't want to throw you a curveball a little bit. I know that you cover other areas. How does Yakima County compare to some of the other areas, both just around us, and I know you deal with mostly eastern Washington.
Right, or central, pretty much, yes.
How do we compare to other areas in the state?
Very comparable.
Right.
You know, I think that agriculture, like you mentioned, Sean, is a pillar of our local economy. Yes. We have well over a quarter of our jobs in agriculture, and that's very similar, whether you look at Yakima County, Grant County, Chelan, Douglas, Okanagan County. Right. The one that's a little different is Kititas County. Mm-hmm. And remember, the types of crops grown in Kititas are a little different. Although they do have deciduous tree fruits, it's primarily Timothy hay.
Yes.
It's a little less labor intensive. There's 6 to 7% of Kititas County's jobs in agriculture.
And I would guess forestry, there's probably a little more forestry.
Well, somewhat, but even forestry I think is not as big in Kititas as it was 20 years ago. Yes. What is the driver of the Kititas County economy? It's primarily Central Washington University. It has about, altogether we have state government with about 10% of the jobs in Kititas County, but 20% of the wages.
Oh, yeah.
So Kititas is a little different. However, Yakima, Grant, Adams, Chelan, Douglas, Okanagan, agriculture is still key. And certainly there's other industries in there besides agriculture, but it's still the big kid on the block in terms of total covered employment in each of those counties.
And that agricultural setting gives us our quality of life here. I always like to think about that. I'm a country boy at heart, and so being raised on a farm is part of our culture here, and so
Yes.
and it will always be. I don't see that trend.
No, and every area, you know, if you look at it, has its organizational structure.
Right.
The clusters, if you will. There's certain clusters that most areas have.
Right.
Agriculture is one of our clusters.
Yeah.
And I don't think it can be either good or bad at times, but it is what it is. And when I say that the figure we mentioned earlier with, I think it was 27% in 2020 of all jobs in Yakima, all covered jobs in Yakima County in agriculture, those are just on the farm or in the orchard. If we were to add in manufacturing, remember a lot of manufacturing jobs are food manufacturing,
Right.
directly related to agriculture. Then we see the agricultural dependent jobs rise.
Yes.
If we look at wholesale trade, fresh fruit packing, many jobs in fresh fruit packing, what are they packing? Deciduous tree fruits.
Yes.
So they're directly dependent on agriculture.
Yeah.
If we look at transportation and trucking, so many trucking jobs are directly dependent on agriculture. So it's even a bigger player, I think, in the Yakima County economy than many would be led to believe just by looking at agricultural employment data.
But we do want to, some of those trends, like we were talking about earlier, we have a wonderful place to live, and some of those jobs, it's easier for people with the technology we have today to have some of the higher wage earning jobs, and they live in our community, they spend their money in our community, but they work in Seattle. They telecommute to Seattle, and that benefits our area tremendously, I would guess.
Yes. And in fact, you know, I wasn't going to bring this in, but if we could,
Okay.
one of the things we
One more,
mentioned.
Don. We got about 3 minutes
We got
left.
3 minutes to talk about one more slide. And here we get into the most current data. So it's not annual average, it's just December. And this would be slide 19.
Okay.
Slide 19, we're just going to look at civilian labor force trends. How did we compare December 2021 versus December 2020? And what does it show us? That between the Decembers of 2020 and 2021, Yakima County's labor force expanded. We discussed that earlier. The number of unemployed shrank, and the rate dropped 2.4 points. Specifically, the unemployment rate in December 2021, 5.9%. How about December 2020, 8.3%. 2.4 percentage point drop, one of the lowest rates in history for Kititas. Good news, but again, the labor force was a little bit smaller, you know, compared to years ago. So that's still good news. What's the takeaway? My point was, when I looked at resident employment, which derived from these labor force numbers, we had 114,352 Yakima County residents in the labor force in December 2020. December 2021, 118,443. That's over 4,000 more residents employed in Yakima County, 4,091 to be exact. That's a 3.6% rise in resident employment. The labor force only grew at a 1% clip. The resident employment grew 3.6% clip.
And that's those people with actual jobs.
Those are the people working in Yakima County, especially that includes teleworking or commuting to jobs. They're Yakima County residents. So what these data tend to show, in a nutshell, is that in relative terms, more Yakima County residents are either teleworking or commuting to jobs outside of the county. It's good news for Yakima County residents.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of information. You've given us a lot of data, Don. Is there anything else you want to touch on just briefly as we close up?
I think just to recap is one of the big topics now is how bad was COVID-19 and how fast are we recovering? Right. And I think in a nutshell, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, so to speak. How to be fair was 2020 was a dismal year.
Yes.
The labor force shrank, non-farm employment shrank. 2021 was a relatively good year, especially the second, third, and fourth quarters. Non-farm employment's been growing for 9 consecutive months. Labor force has been expanding for 7 consecutive months. We're going into calendar year 2022 in a pretty good way. Right. I think it's 2022. If this trend continues, 2022 should be a much better year than probably the last two.
Wonderful. And that's positive for our local economy and for all of us just to be working and to keep driving forward and moving forward and improving our community.
And there's one escape clause, barring unforeseen events.
Right, yes.
And that's something, there's certain things like none of us can see.
And we've lived some of those
We've
over the
lived
last
some of
couple
those.
of years. Many of us haven't. So I want to thank you, Don, for joining me today. I know that this information is very important to get out to our residents, and so they know where our economy is, and there are some positive trends going on.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I want to thank you again for joining us today. And I look forward to speaking to you again on this and other issues. Like we said, we have talked about doing a more regular thing,
Yes.
so we can give people more updates.
Well, I appreciate it. It's a chance for us in our division, our data division,
Right.
to get our heads out of the computer and to share some of the data and the analysis that we have. So thank you.
And all the work that you've done. Also, people can get this information. How can they contact you? Where can they find some of this?
The last slide I have here,
Okay.
which I believe is slide 22,
Right.
contains my name, and email address, and telephone number. So they can reach us. We also have a website, which is on that very last slide,
We'll put
which
that
is slide, I
information
believe, 22 out of
Right.
22. Send me an email or give me a call on my agency phone. I'll do the best I can to answer. Sometimes I can answer the question.
Right.
Often I can't, but I can usually refer a person to someone who can help.
Right. Which is what people are looking for when they want that.
That's all we can do.
information. So, all right. I appreciate you joining us today, Don.
Thank you, Sean.
And thank you very much for joining us. And thank you all for joining us today.
Stay on target.
Almost there.
Stay on target.
Almost there.
What?